All right, friends, welcome to today's show. So I'm going to jump into the 2025 plan for Microstrategy, now rebranded to Strategy. And I'm going to break this down in a very simple Cliff Notes fashion. Michael Saylor and his crew went live yesterday giving a report that was pretty extensive. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. And my whole goal is to make this really simple on what is happening with Microstrategy and what the goal is in 2025 per the founders and the head executives and what their report has basically been. So I'm going to give you some data. I'm going to make it simple today. And I'm also going to just give facts and data because I know in times of, MicroStrategy is down, it's chopping sideways. In times of fear, the best way to make decisions is based on data. And then based on the data, you can determine what you think about the stock. All right. So again, this is not financial advice at all. This is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered financial, legal, or investment advice. All right. So do your own research on anything that's shared here and fact check everything. All right. My goal here is to give you some concepts that are super simple today and break them down in a way that anybody can understand as you're looking at 2025. So I think the first thing that we need to look at for MicroStrategy, and this is something that Saylor and his team talked about in their report yesterday, is just that if you look at the stock over the last 4 years, it is the best performing stock, and there's no comparison between what you have with MicroStrategy and NVIDIA is the second runner. So in terms of the performance, MicroStrategy's done about 2,400 over the last 4 years, and you have NVIDIA that's a close second, approximately around 1,000. You can go pull the exact numbers, but 1,000%. So in terms of the best performing stock over the last 4 years, there is no close second. MicroStrategy outperforms everybody. Bitcoin trails behind NVIDIA a little bit, like lower than NVIDIA. NVIDIA is around 1,000%, and Bitcoin over 4 years has been a bit lower than NVIDIA. So when you look at these two assets, they're high performing assets, and they're super good assets. To answer your question on how much money I have in MicroStrategy, I'm not going to share dollar amounts for protection purposes, but my portfolio, I'm in the top percentiles in the world in terms of holding it, and I am also, my weighted portion of MicroStrategy is about 65% to my Bitcoin holdings, which is about 30% or maybe 60-30, and then the rest Tesla. So that's my holdings. Okay. So in terms of the stock itself, let's just go through 2025 and what we're looking at. Also, to give you just data, so I'm fully in on this game, and my money is where my mouth is. I started investing in MicroStrategy in early 2024, which was February. So you can go look at the stock price of what it was back then. I started loading in then. So I've been investing in this heavily for over a year. I bought my first shares of MicroStrategy in 2020. I bought my first shares of Bitcoin in 2008, not shares, but first Bitcoins in 2018. So I'm all in on this game. I love this game. I believe this game. I'm still holding in this game. I have taken profits in Bitcoin over the years. I have not sold MicroStrategy yet, but I've taken some profits because about 2 or 3% of my allocations I trade. So on MicroStrategy, I trade a 2x version of it, which is called MSTU, and I trade in and out, and I take some money and profits off of that. So there you go. Okay. So let's take a look at what we got going on here. Okay. So the basic report yesterday is obviously MicroStrategy has rebranded to Strategy, but the stock has crushed it over the last 4 years. And, one of the things that Saylor and them talked about in the presentation yesterday was pretty simple. The fact that, if you look at why somebody would hold MicroStrategy versus an ETF, MicroStrategy goes up proportionally more than an ETF of Bitcoin, simply because the way they acquire Bitcoin. And an ETF is just going to go up by the increase in the value and the appreciation of the Bitcoin. But MicroStrategy is going to go up disproportionately in a good way because they are acquiring more Bitcoin by issuing shares, and they're acquiring more Bitcoin by issuing debt. Now, on that point, if you look at 2025, and these are very round numbers, just to give you the point of very round numbers, But if you look at the plan of the 21-21 plan, which is 42 billion Bitcoin, and the plan was to purchase that over a 3-year period, they've acquired more than half that plan. They've implemented more than half that plan, and in terms of buying over 21 billion Bitcoin in the last in 2024 into 2025. And when you look at the majority of that money that bought Bitcoin, it was from issuing shares, what's called tapping the ATM, right? So they've been issuing shares to do that primarily. So of the 21 billion and 21 billion, 21 billion, the plan is to issue shares to acquire more Bitcoin, and about 17 billion of that has been tapped already. So I know you hear on the internet all the time that he's tapping the ATM again, he's issuing more shares, he's diluting the shares. But ultimately, most of the tapping of the ATM took place already in 2024. And so in terms of tapping the ATM, there's about 4 billion in change left to tap to get the rest of that 21 billion portion of the plan. So we know that, market sentiment, people are kind of like, he's tapping the ATM again, it's diluting my shares. And yes, there is truth to that in the short run, that the shares are being diluted. But ultimately, it's increasing your Bitcoin per share, which I'm going to talk about in this video, because that's a really important component. So there's actually not, in terms of the net, when you look at the dilution of shares, there's no comparison, because there's such a small dilution of the shares compared to the Bitcoin growth that is accomplished as a result of that. I'm going to give you a very simple example today to explain that, but it's very, very simple. And when he does tap the ATM to actually buy more Bitcoin, it's very, 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 very good, despite what people think in week-to-week basis. It's very, very good. And the Bitcoin yield that Saylor announced in 2024 of what they accomplished of 74% Bitcoin yield is a direct result of tapping the ATM. And that's why you have a high Bitcoin yield, okay, which is you want Bitcoin per share. You want your shares, your Bitcoin per share to increase. That's the goal, okay? And if you look at the increase of Bitcoin per share from the beginning of 2024 to the end of 2024, it went up significantly. And as a shareholder, that's what we want. So that's very, very good news. And I'll get into some examples on that as well in a few minutes, okay? So that's really good news. In terms of like the overall strategy and what they're sticking to is really good news. Now, the convertible notes, we know that the convertible notes are really, really good. And we're going to see a lot more of that in 2025, because based on the 21 plan, 21 billion through issuing shares and 21 billion through convertible notes, a very small portion of the convertible notes have been issued already. So approximately, and I'm just giving like comparative numbers, it's not the actual data, it's off by a little bit. But if you look at issuing 17 billion shares at the market, and there's 4 billion left on the 21 billion plan, and then you look at 4 billion of convertible notes, and there's 17 billion more of convertible notes for 2025, the proportion of convertible notes in 2025 coming up is super high. So a lot of what's going to be buying Bitcoin in 2025 is convertible notes. And the reason we like that, because we get concerned in terms of what I see in the market sentiment week to week. People get concerned. He's tapping the ATM again. He's tapping the ATM. Well, the good thing is when he issues convertible notes, which is basically like, hey, loan me some money, I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. There's not a share dilution in that moment that takes place. It takes place in the future when it gets converted into stock, but in that moment, there's not a share dilution. So what happens for Microstrategy is they increase their Bitcoin holdings and they add to their Bitcoin stack, and there's not any impact on the dilution of the shares because it's not diluting shares. But you have shares that are issued in the marketplace. Whatever's issued is out there in the marketplace. And so if MicroStrategy is acquiring more Bitcoin from issuing shares and also more Bitcoin from getting loans by issuing debt, it's a really good thing because they're increasing their Bitcoin stack. And so basically in Saylor's presentation, he says there's two things to look at when we look at like MicroStrategy in 2025. Number one, you got to be looking at Bitcoin per share, increasing the Bitcoin per share. Okay. And then number two, you got to look at the Bitcoin gain, the increase in the amount of Bitcoin that MicroStrategy acquires throughout the year. Okay. And then there's like a basic formula that goes into that. It's not black and white on just the number of Bitcoin they acquire, there's a Bitcoin gain that takes place throughout the year. So you have X amount of Bitcoin in the beginning of the year at X price, and at the end of the year, you have Y amount of Bitcoin at Y price. And throughout the year, they're buying Bitcoin at different price points, right? So somewhere in there throughout the year, you have a Bitcoin gain. So you have an increase in the Bitcoin, and there's a gain associated with that. And there was certainly a gain associated with it last year. You'd have to go do the math to see what the actual Bitcoin gain was. But his projection for 2025 is he wants to get a $10 billion Bitcoin gain, which is good. And he also wants to get a 15% Bitcoin yield. Okay, so if we break it down just simply to two things, like we want an increase in Bitcoin per share, because as a shareholder, I want the amount of Bitcoin I have in proportion to the shares that I own to go up. So more Bitcoin per share, more Bitcoin per share, more Bitcoin per share. That's a good thing. Okay, so that's what the strategy is accomplishing. And then we look at also for MicroStrategy an increase in their Bitcoin holdings. And now obviously they buy Bitcoin at different price points throughout the year. We know that. So what they're acquiring it at, you want them to acquire it at a good price as they're buying it throughout the year, because that obviously affects, MicroStrategy throughout 2024 and 2025 at the price they're buying at it. But in terms of a long-term viewpoint, he keeps buying, because the sentiment from Saylor and his team obviously is one day they think it's going to hit $1 million per coin. One day they think it could get to 13 million per coin. So in terms of continuing to buy, whether they're buying at 95,000 or 100,000 or 105,000 or 150,000, if it gets there, when they're buying at these price points, he's buying with a long-term time horizon and continuing on this long-term strategy. So this is a good thing, right? So two things, again, to recap that he's looking at in 2025. The two main things are the Bitcoin gain of the company and also the Bitcoin per year yield, the Bitcoin per share. And he also, terms this as Bitcoin yield. So he talks about Bitcoin yield in that same definition, okay? So that is the basic game plan. Now, it's really good that we have a lot of convertible notes left to be issued, and I think people are going to be very happy with that. And I think it also, there's an element that goes into play that if the market feels like, this is just my opinion, if the market feels like, God, he's tapping the ATM again, then the market sentiment doesn't feel good about that, even though it's a really good thing because it increases the Bitcoin per share. But if the market sentiment isn't good about it all the time, then obviously convertible notes would increase the market sentiment and the feeling towards MicroStrategy and the idea of, wow, we're just borrowing money at a very low interest rate to buy Bitcoin. And we're going to see a lot of that in 2025 because we have to see a lot of that because it's part of his $42 billion plan or the 21-21 plan. The convertible notes, there's about 16 or 17 billion still that need to be bought in terms of, buying Bitcoin with it. So that's super solid. Now, the way to understand Bitcoin per share, to break this down in super simple terms, I like things super simple. So breaking down Bitcoin per share this is how I do it. And this is a totally not real number example. It's just an example to get the concept and the understanding of what's happening. So let's say at the beginning of the year, I have 10 shares. And those 10 shares are 10 Bitcoin, okay? This is totally not real. We know those numbers aren't true. Just get the concept, right? So if you write this down and you go, okay, at the beginning of the year, let's say I have 10 shares and then I got 10 Bitcoin, right? This is for MicroStrategy. And then throughout the year, all of a sudden, there's an increase in the shares. Okay, so how is there an increase in the shares? More shares get issued. So when you hear like MicroStrategy is tapping the ATM or issuing more shares, they're putting more shares, they're issuing more shares in the marketplace. So let's say at the beginning of the year, it was 10 shares, for example purposes. And then they issue more shares, 5 more shares. So now, if you had 10 shares at the beginning of the year, but now you have 5 more shares, which is 15 shares at the end of the year. 10 plus 5 equals 15. There's more shares issued. So on one end, you look at that and like, wow, this is not good. We don't want more shares in the marketplace. It's not good. But it is good because on the first line of it, I have 10 shares in the marketplace of MicroStrategy. We've issued 5 more shares. We now have 15. So that's the idea of it's just been diluted, right? There's a dilution going on. But if I increase my shares from 10 to 15, which 10 goes to 15, that's an increase of 5. And at the beginning of the year, I have 10 shares, which is 10 Bitcoin. And then I issue 5 more shares. But at the end of the year, I now have 20 Bitcoin. I now have 15 shares and 20 Bitcoin versus at the beginning of the year, I had 10 shares and I had 10 Bitcoin. So the point is, and this is just an example, this is not the actual math of what's happening, nor is this actually a real example. But I have 10 shares and they go up by 5, it's a 50% increase. That 10 shares is equating to 10 Bitcoin at the beginning of the year, as in this example. But now my shares go up by 50%, but now my Bitcoin goes from 10 Bitcoin at the 10 shares to 20 Bitcoin. So what I've got now is my shares went up by 5, but my Bitcoin went up by 10. So all day long, I'm going to take that. I'm like, wow, my shares went by 5. I issued 5 more shares, but that 5 more shares got me 10 Bitcoin. Who would take that deal? Take it all day long. And that's what's happening. So if there's more shares in the marketplace, those shares are buying a lot more Bitcoin. So while the dilution is this, the increase of Bitcoin per share is this. And so while temporarily people flip out and go, wow, he's tapping the ATM, he's issuing shares, he's diluting the shares, he's diluting the shares, he's diluting the shares in a very minimal way to acquire a massive amount more Bitcoin. So the proportion and the ratio is like, this is just an example, okay? Increase shares by this much, acquire Bitcoin by that much. You take that all day long. And as a shareholder, you take that all day long. And that's what's happening when he's issuing shares to buy more Bitcoin. And we saw that this play happened in 2024, and it was a freaking screaming winner. And we've seen the stock over the last 4 years. It's gone up by 2,400%. No stock outpaces it or beats it in terms of the top stocks out there. And we see that the strategy has been working. And now going into 2025, since a lot of the shares have been issued in terms of the strategy to tap the ATM, to issue more shares, and of the 21-21 plan, to repeat, 17 billion approximately has been issued in terms of shares to buy more Bitcoin. And then of the convertible note 21 billion plan, very small portion, like 4 billion or so. And I'm giving you very rough numbers, but those are very rough numbers, okay? So we've got something like 16 or 17 or 15 billion more of convertible notes that are going to be purchased in 2025. That's good. Or are they going to be issued, I should say, in 2025, okay, to acquire more Bitcoin. That's great. It's great news. All right. So those are the good things that are happening. So all I'm giving right now is some data and some facts, because like when things are chopping sideways, when things are dropping, when there's fear in the marketplace, the important thing is to just look at the long-term horizon for 2025 and look at what is the game plan? Is the game plan still solid? What is the company doing? And do we agree with their strategy? No pun intended. Obviously, they rebranded to strategy, but do you agree with the strategy? Do you believe that issuing shares in a little amount to get a massive amount more Bitcoin is a good strategy? Do you believe that borrowing money at a very low interest rate? I think their interest rate for 2024 at what they borrowed at was, I think, 0.56% interest rate, 0.56. So they're borrowing money at 0.56%. On average. Some of these are 0% loans that they're getting. So they're borrowing at a very, very minimal amount, and they're buying a bunch of Bitcoin. So in summary, issue shares, very little dilution for the massive acquisition of Bitcoin. So it's very little dilution in comparison to the massive acquisition, and then borrow money at very, very little interest, almost non-existent for a massive amount of Bitcoin acquired. That's why people invest in MicroStrategy. And that's why it's different than holding an ETF, because of those two things. It's just that simple. Okay. And obviously, of course, it's a company and it's a stock. But that's why when people say or ask the question, because I've had people say, why would I not just put my money in an ETF, or why would I not just buy Bitcoin? I'm like, great, do both, and not financial advice. But for me, I own Bitcoin and I own MicroStrategy. All right. Now, MicroStrategy is much more volatile. And when you look at the volatility and what Saylor was talking about with the volatility index the other day, the volatility of MicroStrategy is up at like an 89. He was sharing in yesterday's report. It's high comparatively to Bitcoin, which is much lower. But if you look at NVIDIA's volatility in the report, they're in the 70s. So NVIDIA is an extremely volatile stock as well. But all day long, people are buying that because maybe they understand it, maybe they don't. But, they're both highly volatile stocks. And I like how Saylor says it, that volatility means there's lots of energy in it, as this stock has lots of energy, which is true. So anything that you're looking at, like ideally, it's just the idea that it's a super volatile stock. And there's reasons why MicroStrategy's come out with new products. Like they came out with Strike. I keep calling it MicroStrategy. I'll probably do that for a while, even though it's called Strategy now. But there's a reason why they've come out with new stocks. And by the way, with the earnings report yesterday, so what? Like they came out with not a good earnings report because it didn't account for the Bitcoin on the balance sheet at the current market value. But in Q1, when the report comes out, they're going to report $12.75 billion approximately of retained earnings, which basically means their earnings after their expenses and after dividends are paid out. So after all their expenses and all their dividends are paid out, they're going to report a $12.7 billion of earnings in the Q1 report. That's going to be a massive increase for the actual company, massive increase. So I do understand, and I was watching a YouTube show the other day of somebody who's negative on MicroStrategy in terms of like in terms of what they think of the stock and blah, blah, blah. And, it's always good to get different points of view. But I think if you're strong in your point of view, like I am on it, is there risk? Could it go down? Could I lose money? Yeah, it's always a reality, right? So that's always real. Am I still extremely bullish? And do I still hold on to my point of view? And do I still believe that 2025 is going to be bullish? I do. And I hold on to that from my money and investing point of view. And it's just my point of view, right? And so as I was watching something the other night, somebody who was a little bit negative about MicroStrategy and was talking about the earnings report, I watched it and I was like, okay, I can listen to a different point of view on it. But I was looking at it, I was like, oh, this person is really just looking at the software company and looking at the earnings report on the software company and then comparing it to like a Microsoft or comparing it to a Google and what have you. Now, in due fairness, I didn't watch the whole video and I have nothing negative to say about it other than the fact that I just have a different viewpoint. That when you look at MicroStrategy, and Saylor talks about this in his video last night, like you're going to value this company in a different way. And the reason you're going to value this company in a different way is because it's a new animal. It's a new beast in the marketplace. It just is. So what they're doing has some traditional handles or levers that they use that have been used for a long, long time, such as, issuing stock, such as convertible debt. That's nothing new at all. But the fact that they're using it to buy Bitcoin, and the fact that they're not like an Apple that sells iPhones and all of a sudden has earnings, on their iPhone in terms of like, wow, they sold some iPhones and here's their earnings report. They're buying Bitcoin and they're holding it. They're not selling it. So it's a very different company. And so Saylor says, like, if you're going to look at valuing the company, you can decide on what multiple you want to value it at. But you do have to look at the increase in the one, you have to look at the company's Bitcoin holdings, which are about $47 billion right now. And then you have to look at the Bitcoin gain, which is what I was talking about earlier on, which when you look at early 2024, they had this much Bitcoin at this much price point. And at the end of 2024, they had this much Bitcoin, and then the price point was at 100,000. So in early 2024, the price point was lower. They had this much Bitcoin. At the end of 2024, the price was higher and they had this much Bitcoin. And throughout that year, they bought a whole bunch of Bitcoin at different prices. And when you look at all of those factors and you add it up, you have a Bitcoin gain. So what Saylor is saying is just look at the Bitcoin gain that we have. You have to take that into consideration. You have to look at our Bitcoin gain. So you should look at MicroStrategy's Bitcoin holdings, which we know sits around 47 billion, right? Then we look at MicroStrategy's Bitcoin gain throughout the year, because you have to have some way to measure it. So you look at the Bitcoin gain, he's saying, and then you start to look at how are they increasing the Bitcoin per share, which I just gave the example of. Every time they issue more shares and buy more Bitcoin, it is accretive when they do that. Okay. And every time they issue more debt, when they borrow money to buy more Bitcoin, they're increasing the Bitcoin holdings, which is also good for the Bitcoin per share, because they're getting more Bitcoin relative to the number of shares that are already out there in the marketplace. So Saylor's just saying somehow you have to value us a multiple of this. You decide on what the multiple is. But their goal in 2025 is to get a Bitcoin gain of $10 billion. So if you just valued and you go, hey, the multiple on their Bitcoin gain of 10 billion would be 10x, that's a $100 billion company. But then if you add in their Bitcoin holdings of 47 billion, that's a $147 billion company. Right? So right now, MicroStrategy is being valued approximately around, $100 billion or so. I actually think that's low based on the formula that he's saying, hey, this is how we should be valued. I think the multiple should be higher than 10 personally, but I'm being bullish with it and aggressive with it, because when you look at, an Apple's earnings per share, even though this is not the same thing, because we're not talking about earnings here, but when you look at Apple's earning per share, it's like a 30x multiple in some cases. So what multiple would you put on this company? Would you put a 1, a 2, a 5, a 10? That's what he's saying. You decide. So everybody needs to look at it the same way, but we're all getting the same facts. We're all getting the same data. I'm putting in concepts that I understand. Hopefully it makes sense for you. But I think that this ultimately is a good thing, and it's a good way to start looking at how do you value a company like this. Okay. So in summary, closing on this, the cliff notes are really simple. Number one, over the last 4 years, MicroStrategy has been the best performing stock by far. NVIDIA has been around 1,000. MicroStrategy has been 2,400%. Number two, MicroStrategy is different than holding an ETF of Bitcoin, or different than holding Bitcoin, because they do two very specific things. One, they issue shares and they buy more Bitcoin. And two, they get loans, meaning they issue debt and they buy more Bitcoin. And so through that type of leverage, people see the strategy and they are willing to pay a premium. And so just understanding that simple concept of like, if my pizza shop is really, really popular and it's the hottest pizza shop in town, a lot of people are going to be willing to pay more for the pizza. Okay. I mean, in fact, my friend just today was showing me this thing online. He's like, look at this pizza and look how this guy makes it, and look at the dough, and it's so pure. And he's doing this and he's doing this with the tomatoes and he's doing that. It's like pure pizza. It's like not the garbage that most people eat with the fake dairy and the bad gluten and all this stuff. It's like the pure pizza, And so when you look at what MicroStrategy is doing, it's like they got the pure Bitcoin, they got the pure pizza in there. They got the good ingredients. And so people are looking at this and they're like, wow, look at the Bitcoin treasure chest. I'm willing to pay more for this stock. And it's the market sentiment and what people are willing to pay that is why it's trading at a premium. So because it's trading at a premium, it's a really, really good thing for us, because there's an excess people are willing to pay. And then that excess is used to buy more Bitcoin. Hence the fact that MicroStrategy goes up more than Bitcoin. It's just that simple. It's really not, it is a real background. Somebody's asking. It's a real background. Somebody else, Abwat says, is that a real background? Yeah, it is. So it's just what people are willing to pay. They're willing to pay a premium for the stock. Okay. And then people are willing to loan money. And then you see other intelligent ways of, Noah's asking, what do I prefer, MSTU versus MSTR versus BitX? For me personally, I have my money in MSTR, and then I trade with MSTU. I also hold some MSTU. that I got into at a very low price point early on. And so overall, that's been profitable for me. MicroStrategy, as you know, I got into at a very low price point early on. So I'm profitable, extremely profitable. So, you know, I can sit here and have a vantage point that may be a little bit more relaxed than somebody who might be negative on MicroStrategy. So I just share this data because we're all in different situations. And when you have data and you're informed, you can make good decisions on it. But MSTU is super risky. You know, if somebody can't stomach MicroStrategy, they're certainly not going to be able to stomach MSTU. If you're wondering what MSTU is, it's like a 2x leveraged form of MicroStrategy. So it's like it's an ETF that was designed to go up 2x what MicroStrategy goes up on a daily basis. So if MicroStrategy goes up 5%, it's designed to go up 10%. If MicroStrategy goes down 5%, it's designed to go down 10%. So in comparison to Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, if you think that MicroStrategy is volatile compared to Bitcoin, something like MSTU is volatile compared to MicroStrategy. So the volatility on that is crazy. So I invest in that from more of a short-term viewpoint, but Bitcoin and MicroStrategy I invest in from more of a long-term viewpoint. And also, as I've shared in previous videos, I will take profits. I have taken profits along the way, particularly with Bitcoin, since I've been holding it since 2018. So I'm not one who simply believes in just holding the asset, holding 100% of the asset in perpetuity and never selling it. I don't believe that. Will I sell all my Bitcoin? No. So it's just my personal point of view of living through bull markets and watching bull runs and watching it go all the way up and all the way down and experiencing what that feels like. And you got to have a cast iron stomach to stomach it. So wherever you're at right now, I like Master the Game says, I'm just stacking as many lots of MicroStrategy as possible. I like it. Sounds cool. So yeah, I mean, I'm highly invested in this. I don't like to share my portfolio money amount because, like, you know, you got to be careful in this world today. But I'm highly invested in it. I've done extremely well in it, and I've been through my allocations like I shared in the beginning of the video, so you can go watch that if you have questions on it. And the final thing I think that's what's really important, and I'm going to reiterate it again for those of you just joining us. If you have a pen and piece of paper, take it out, because the Bitcoin per share is a very important component of MicroStrategy, and the increase in Bitcoin per share. And if you watch this play out of holding MicroStrategy over the next 5-6 years, your Bitcoin per share could go up drastically. It also could go down drastically, and it could all go to zero. But I think the probability of that is very, very unlikely. So if you understand the Bitcoin per share, the example I gave earlier was simple, and this is just an example, and this has no, this math is not real at all in any form or shape or form, and it's actually completely wrong, the math, and the numbers are completely wrong, but the concept is all I'm trying to get across, okay? So if you have 10 shares in the beginning of the year, and that's 10 Bitcoin, right? So this is an example for MicroStrategy. I have 10 shares and I have 10 Bitcoin, right? And then I issue more shares. We hear this all the time. They just issued more shares, right? So let's say over the course of the year, they issue 5 more shares. So now my shares go from 10 to 15 shares. So in the grand scheme of that, we're like, wow, they're issuing more shares. They're diluting my value as a shareholder because they're issuing more shares. Okay, it's a common thing that has been done for a while where companies issue more shares. The reason this is different than a normal company issuing shares is because when they issue the shares, the additional shares, they use the money from the shares to buy Bitcoin. And so what's happening is if the shares are going up by 5, but the Bitcoin that they buy with it is going up by 10, all day long, you would issue 5 more shares to get 10 more Bitcoin. Make sense? So the issuance of the shares, it's dilutive in a very, very minuscule way compared to the money that is collected by the company from the issuance of shares. So I issue the shares in the marketplace as MicroStrategy. Somebody gives me money for that. But I'm buying more Bitcoin in proportion to the amount of shares that were issued. So the dilution is so small but the increase in Bitcoin is much bigger. So again, even though the sentiment of the market is like, wow, he's issuing shares again. And yes, sentiment does have something to play into the confidence of shareholders and more people are going to buy. It does play a role. For the shareholder like us, it's very, very good. They use the word accretive. And it's very, very accretive for us as shareholders when that strategy is done. And we like it even more when they just borrow money to buy the damn Bitcoin, because they're borrowing at 0% interest and sometimes at very low interest, and they're buying more Bitcoin. Hence, all of this leads to an increase in Bitcoin, which is a Bitcoin gain over the course of the year. And Saylor is looking to increase the Bitcoin, to have a Bitcoin gain over the course of the year, to increase the Bitcoin that you hold per share as a shareholder, which is the greatest good for everybody involved, which is why I believe in MicroStrategy. End of story. Okay. So that's the simplicity of what's happening as it relates to like Strike and the preferred stock that is. Does that have any relative meaning to us as common shareholders? It's a good way. Is it good for us? Yes, because we know that they're issuing preferred stock, and in doing that, they're able to take the money and buy more Bitcoin. So it is helping acquire more Bitcoin, which is a good thing. But it's for me, it's not a vehicle for me. It's more for people who want some exposure to Bitcoin, so to speak, some exposure to the market, but are looking for more of a fixed dividend. It pays out about 8% over the course of the year. And so, you know, for an investor who's looking to get some fixed returns, they want to buy into MicroStrategy. And then if MicroStrategy hits $1,000 price point, they can convert some of that into actual common shares and own some common shares like us, but own a very, very small percentage of the common shares in relation to the money that was invested. So if I invest $100,000, I'm going to own a ton of common shares. If they invest $100,000 into Strike, they're going to get a dividend and an option if MicroStrategy hits 1,000 to convert some of that into common shares. And in the end, if MicroStrategy hits $1,000, I'm going to make out a way better as a common shareholder than somebody who owns STRK, the preferred stock. Make sense? So that's basically how that works. So that's the general story of the day. Overall, you know, I'm super bullish on MicroStrategy. I know that you know, Bitcoin's been trading sideways and down. I know MicroStrategy's been trading sideways and down recently. So wherever you are, just, you know, take the data, go watch the good videos that are out there. Go watch people that have conviction in Bitcoin, conviction in MicroStrategy. Go watch the other side of it too. If you're just looking to get the data of like, what are the pros and the cons, you should always look at that in making a decision. And I think overall, this is just it's a great company. I think it's just a great company. And I think they're ahead of their time. And remember, at the end of the day, so few people understand Bitcoin and even fewer people understand MicroStrategy. So Ob Watts asking me, do I think the MicroStrategy NAV premium will gradually fall towards 1 the longer Bitcoin drifts sideways? I mean, what's the NAV premium? I think the NAV premium is hovering around 2 right now. I just think long-term in 2025, I think the NAV premium is going to be around 2. I think there's going to be times where it drips below 2 or dips below 2. I think there's going to be times where it's over 2. We know there were times in 2024 where it was at 3. We know it went down, I think, as low as 1.67 in 2024. But I mean, it just tells you that, you know, when you look at the NAV premium, the net asset value premium, when you look at that, I mean, even at a 1.67, it's still outperforming Bitcoin. At a 2, it's outperforming Bitcoin. Does this mean I say buy MicroStrategy and not Bitcoin? No. I own both. Okay. I really like the volatility. Now I can say that in times where I'm in heavy profits. I can say that in times where I bought in early. You know, if I were to buy in, have bought in at 500 and it dropped to 340, you know, of course I would have different feelings about, wow, man, I don't feel so great about where I'm at right now because I lost money on paper. Yeah, those are normal feelings. But like overall, if one has conviction in the stock, if one has conviction in Bitcoin, if one has conviction of what's happening in 2025. And you also look at what Saylor did last night. He talked about like all the good things that happened in 2024 and all the good things that are happening in 2025. And he just listed them out. You know, we got a pro crypto administration. He talked about the fact that there's 250 people in that are pro crypto in the new administration, 250 plus. He talked about the fact that, you know, more and more companies are adding the Bitcoin standard to their balance sheet, where they're putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Talked about the fact that there's more and more states that are looking to add Bitcoin as a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I think we're up to 18 or 20 at this point. Arizona's at the finish line to getting approval. They might have gotten approval already. Somebody was saying they got approval already. I'm not quite sure. Utah is right at the finish line. Somebody else this morning was talking about New Mexico. But you got many states that are going after this, so that pushes up kind of the bidding war and the competition of like it's a race to see who's going to get a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You look at the U.S. that is committed to some type of strategic digital stockpile. Let's just call it a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You got the sovereign wealth fund of the United States that I think is going to acquire some type of Bitcoin in that fund. You got the Czech banks that are looking heavy into Bitcoin right now and really pursuing an allocation of, I think, of 5% or more of their reserves into Bitcoin. You have so many good indicators, and you know, let's not forget the fact that this wasn't even a real thing in 2024 early, that the U.S. was going to adopt a Bitcoin strategic reserve, because the prior administration was not pro crypto, and now we finally have regulation that's coming in that's pro crypto. And the good thing about regulation is it's good to have regulation, and you know, you want regulation because you want to know where you stand and you want to know where the laws are at. When there's uncertainty, the markets don't like uncertainty. You've seen it when the tariffs were coming up and all that stuff was happening. You saw what's happening with Bitcoin. The markets don't like uncertainty. They like to know there's a plan, there's regulation on Bitcoin, here's what's going to happen. And if they know the plan, the markets tend to price it in a lot of the times. So, you know, there is a plan that's being developed by the U.S. government. And the fact that they're considering a plan and they've assembled a committee to do this is a good thing. So it's chopping sideways right now, blows, right? It drops down a little bit, it blows. Nobody likes waking up in the morning and seeing 96.5 on Bitcoin, MicroStrategy 326. None of us like that. But I think if I look at the indicators are good, you know? And so those are the bullish things. And then you look at a company like MicroStrategy. I mean, if you look at their Bitcoin purchases, let's not forget the majority of their Bitcoin purchases all took place in 2024. So look, in terms of all their Bitcoin purchases in 2024, the majority took place in Q4. The great majority. All right. So when you have that, this is just my viewpoint, but when you have that kind of purchasing power of billions and billions and billions of dollars flowing into Bitcoin from one company, of course, you're going to see massive like market sentiment of, oh my God, this came out with a $42 billion plan. And oh my God, look at the billions, the 10 and the $15 billion of Bitcoin that was purchased in such a short period of time by MicroStrategy in Q4. It's a lot of freaking Bitcoin, man. You know, that's lots of Bitcoin. So of course, you're going to see price volatility. Of course, you're going to see ups and you're going to see downs. But the good news is they came out with a plan that people were super bullish about, 42 billion, and they executed half of that thing in like 90 days. You know? So that's good news. So those are the good things. And, you know, you can also look at the cons and the things that aren't so good, which is like, we don't want to see the price down. It's down. Okay. And we don't want to see it chop it sideways, and it's down. And the volatility, when it goes down a lot. Those are the negatives, you know? And there are plus points and there's negative points to it. And but that's part of owning the stock. So not financial advice to buy it, not financial advice to hold it, no financial advice being given here whatsoever, or tax advice, but make your best decision based on what you believe and based on your viewpoint. And even the most bullish people lose their certainty sometimes. And even the most bullish people are wrong. I could be wrong. You know, 2025 could hit and Bitcoin could stay at 100K. I could be wrong. I don't think it's going to happen. We're already in 2025, so I shouldn't say that. 2025 could carry on and Bitcoin could stay around 100K. And is it possible that that's the top. Yeah, but I don't think that it's likely. And I think that we're going to see I think we're going to see the rest of the bull run take place. And certainly we know in 2021 we were cut short on the bull run. The whole bull run didn't fully carry out. So let's take the bull run all the way through. I love seeing different videos and different posts from people who believe in the fundamentals of Bitcoin, who believe in the fundamental execution strategy of MicroStrategy, now known as Strategy. I love to see the bullish, the optimistic comments from people on that, because it also does inspire this feeling of the overall market, and we need people coming out with good data and good news. But we also cannot be short-sighted and only look at the good news. We have to evaluate any out points or negative points and be mindful of those, because one day some people are going to want to take profits and they're going to want to sell, and they're going to want to sell at the highest price versus selling when it drops and losing money. And that's a very, very real thing. And so we have to take all that into consideration. And nobody's got a crystal ball, you know. I'm just going with what I believe and what I think. And I'm continuing to hold, and I continue to trust in the data that I'm seeing, and I analyze the data, and I look at it every day, and I just continue to form my opinion of it and my point of view, and I hold on to my point of view when I believe it. And when I start to waver on my point of view, if I ever do, I take some actions, or maybe I take some profits. But right now I've got my point of view, and I think it's bullish in 2025 for Bitcoin and bullish for MicroStrategy. So let's see where we end up in August, September, October, and see how the game's played. Okay. And also, I don't think that we're not going to get a plan back in a week from the U.S. government. I don't see that happening. I don't think we're going to get a plan back in, it's what, February now? I don't think we're going to get a plan back in February. And I don't think we're going to get one back in March. So I think maybe we get back one back in April or something. This is total speculation. This is based on no data whatsoever, other than the fact that I think that governments take time. Regulation takes time. And assembling a group of people to get together to make a decision on something and then roll it out where there's group agreement takes a little bit of time. Even take a look at a company. You know, I have companies, and when we get together and make a decision, and then we want to execute a plan, and then we want to put it out in the marketplace, and by the time we pull the trigger, it could be a month. Sometimes it could be 2 months. You know, I'm not talking about a country. I'm talking about a company. So just perspective, you know, keeping perspective of how long it might take, and not losing the faith of the U.S. is committed to some type of strategic Bitcoin reserve or strategic digital stockpile. And they're not going to announce that they're going to be a leader in AI and crypto and not do it. It's just not going to happen. That's my viewpoint. And I remain just strong in my view of it. How much they put into it, I don't know, man. But when you look like at the U.S. reserves, they're not high, man. The U.S. doesn't have high reserves. So where they're going to get the money from it to do it, you know, I mean, there's plenty of ways to do it. How they're going to do it, I don't know. We'll see how they do it. I would love to see them take some of that gold that's valued at $500 billion on the books and take a portion of that and put it in. But other than that, the U.S. reserves are not big comparatively to the U.S. debt. So we'll see where the money comes from, and just a big acknowledgement to Michael Saylor and Strategy, because what have they acquired? 30 billion now of Bitcoin. So and to Larry Fink and their ETF. I mean, and the ETFs that are buying, and particularly to MicroStrategy. I mean, it takes to buy that much Bitcoin. I don't know. Will the U.S. buy 30 billion? One company's done it. So I would take our hats off, and a big acknowledgement to Michael Saylor and the strategy team to make that kind of investment and to put that kind of certainty into the future, and to do it in an asset that is the greatest good for planet Earth. That is a noble cause. It is, to me, the most sound money on the face of the planet. It is, to me, it's the only real money that has value from my viewpoint. I just don't see, obviously, holding my money in the dollar. I can use the dollar to buy things, and that's the value of the dollar. But to store the value of my money, Bitcoin, to me, is the best. I invest in MicroStrategy because I get to get multiples off the Bitcoin. So instead of just getting 100% on Bitcoin, I could get 200% on MicroStrategy. And certainly in 2024, I was the beneficiary of that move, you know? And then do I believe in other stocks and things like that out there? Sure. But in terms of a store of value over the long term, I do believe in Bitcoin. And I do believe it's way better than gold. I don't think there's even any comparison. I think, gold is the Fred Flintstone car of the, I'm being sarcastic here, but of the, first century. And I think that Bitcoin is, it is in line with present time, we all love music from the 80s, and I love to reminisce, and I still love to listen to it, just like you watch the Karate Kid, but they've also reinvented it, and now it's Cobra Kai, right? And now we have a Karate Kid coming out again, but there's a reinvention of it. And so I look at something like gold, and there's been, to some degree, you call it a reinvention of it, even though the properties are distinctly different, right? You have a technology now versus a thing, okay? And we are a technological society, period. We are a digital society, period. And if that wasn't made ever more evident when COVID hit, that we are a digital society, and the fact that AI is here, period. So present time is to get in communication and get the knowledge required to understand the technological innovations of our time, because they're only going to speed up, they aren't going to decline. So the technological innovation of our time is the blockchain, and the leader in this category is Bitcoin. There's no disputes on that. So to not look at the technological innovations of our time in relation to money is actually a bigger risk. So when people say that Bitcoin is risky or the blockchain is risky, no, the risk is not understanding it. That's actually the risk. The risk is living 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. The risk is not being in present time, looking through a new lens and reinventing one's viewpoint to catch up with the times. That's the risk. And age has nothing to do with it. One only becomes irrelevant if they don't assess the data of the present moment and then constantly continue to update their viewpoint based on the present time data. That's how one stays relevant. But if one just stays in the past and says, gold's been so good because it's been around for so many years and blah, 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 and it's the greatest asset and it's not risky and all of that, well, it's just a limited viewpoint. I'm not saying one can't own gold. Right? I do see that there is some value in it. It is a good store of value. It's just not a superior store of value to Bitcoin. And we'll see the race over the next decade. And I'll put a guarantee on here that Bitcoin is going to outperform gold. It just is. And there's no competition. So it's not financial advice. It's not telling you what to do with your money. But for my own personal guarantee of my future, you can bet that my allocations are going to be in Bitcoin versus being in gold. And also, I don't want to be in gold. I just have no interest in it. To me, it's an outdated concept, and it doesn't mean it doesn't have value for certain people. I remember going into my grandpa's basement when he was in his late 90s, and there were gold bars everywhere, and he was stashing his value in gold sitting in his basement. And number one, how safe is that? Number two, how portable is that? Number three, in today's day and age, how relevant is that? And there's obviously more up-to-date ways to store your gold today, but it just doesn't compare in a technological world where the speed of Bitcoin and the speed of the technology and the power of the technology is far superior, and it's not even the same planet. It's like you have one person comparing the two properties together. You have gold, which is a totally separate planet, and you have Bitcoin, which is a different planet. It's a different universe. They're in different universes. And you can compare the properties metaphorically so people get the concept, but they're not the same, right? They have some similar characteristics if you compare the characteristics of like a store of value, but they're not the same. And sanity is recognizing differences. There is a distinct and huge and a massive difference between Bitcoin and gold. Massive, 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 massive. Okay. And we compare them because we like metaphors and we like to compare things, but they're not the same at all. So with that in mind, one's outlook and investment strategy, to me, has to be based on present time data. And so get all the present time data that you can and then make your best decisions on it and look at what you think is going to happen in the next couple of decades. I mean, what do you think Bitcoin's going to go to? I mean, Michael Saylor talks about a $13 million Bitcoin. It's funny to me how people are just, sometimes you hear people like 13 million, like the concept of a 13 million Bitcoin is so radical. Like, I don't understand how that's radical. I don't get it. Like, maybe the concept of 13 million to somebody who doesn't like think in millions, maybe that idea of like 100,000 to 13 million, I get the comparative data. It's like, wow, 13 million. But if you just do the math and you're logical about it and you look at it like Saylor does, of a 29% increase per year over the next 20 or 21 years, I think with that math is how he gets to 13 million. So like if you look at the S&P, which is far less innovative, far less superior, far less relevant right now compared to this new technology, and that's doing 14% a year, is it unreasonable to say that an asset like Bitcoin over the next 20 years is going to average 29% per year? It's not unreasonable at all. It's completely freaking logical. It's just a logical, predictive analysis of what's going to happen in the future, you know? So you're dealing with an engineer, you know, an MIT graduate who's running this company. And if you look at the moves they're making, they're highly, highly intelligent. And the leverage that they have is so minimal right now. If you look at the convertible debt, the actual convertible debt they have, he was going through this in the presentation yesterday, that they have outstanding. It's about $3 billion compared to their $45 billion plus in holdings of Bitcoin. They're covered by 15x on the leverage there, guys, in terms of their debt. 3 billion to 45 billion of Bitcoin holdings. So their debt cover is 15x. 15x, man. So we are dealing with highly intelligent people in MicroStrategy. We're dealing with a highly innovative company, and we are dealing with a company that I believe reflects the values of the American public and the world. Because when you look at the decision to get into Bitcoin in 2020 by MicroStrategy, it was done partly out of necessity and desperation. It was the idea that the company of MicroStrategy might not be in business 6 or 7 years from now if the government keeps printing the money at the rate that they were printing in 2020. So the decision was made out of a lot of necessity, not like comfort of this would be a good move or this would be nice if it works out. Saylor's decision and the company's decision to invest in Bitcoin was done out of necessity. And you know what? The greatest things in life are done out of necessity. You know, one can create their own level of necessity by going, hey, my level of necessity, even though it's not what you need to survive or eat, could be $10 billion. That's my necessity. I got to get there and I need to get there. And you just make it a need to get there and it's a positive thing. But some people's necessity level of survival is like a thing where this has to happen. Right? So there's varying degrees of it. This has to happen. And MicroStrategy is in a position where it has to happen. And so because they believed they were sitting on a melting iceberg with the printing of money. And so they made some decisions based out of necessity. And to them, it wasn't as big of a risk as sitting on a company that was a melting iceberg, meaning the entire amount of the money in their treasury at the time, they felt was going to melt away because of the printing of money. And you can't sit there with 3% that you're earning on your money sitting in your treasury through T-bills or wherever the hell they're putting their money in, and watch the money supply going up by 20% in 2000 or 14% in 2020, 14% in 2021, an average of 40% over that 4-year period, 3-year period, or 2.5-year period, I should say, 40% increase. You can't sit there and watch your $250 million that's sitting there melt away and go down to by $100 million. That would be a 40% decrease. Right? I'm earning 3%, but like over 2.5 years, the increase in the money supply goes up by 40-something%. You're losing a massive amount of your value and your purchasing power. So it was done out of necessity. And I think it's you have the macrocosm of MicroStrategy as the big leader in this, and you take a look at the microcosm of the individual who might be mirroring this strategy and looking at, is this a necessity thing for me? And when I look at it, I'm like, this is necessity. It's necessity. I'm not going to take my hard-earned money and the millions and millions of dollars that I make in my company and sit there and all of a sudden put it into a melting iceberg. I'm just not. I'm certainly not going to invest it into an economy where most of the companies are rigged in terms of the financial system and the banking system. Like, I'm not going to put it into that economy. So I'm going to find ways to invest in a new economy, which is why I love Bitcoin. So the American public is facing a very simple thing, or a very similar thing. It's not the same, but also the entire global public of the entire world, and every citizen in every country and every planet in the world has some similarity to the position that Saylor was. Not the same at all, because you have a company that has 250 million versus a person on planet Earth who might have dollars, right? But the necessity level is like, something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. And so just like Microstrategy wasn't willing to sit on a melting iceberg and earn 3% while the money supply is going up by way more, the American public, or citizens all across the world, or people all across the planet, probably are not going to sit there and be willing to sit on their peso or their dollar or their euro or whatever they hold and put them in investments in that are not doing and outpacing inflation or outpacing the printing of money. And so there is a necessity level for a new kind of vehicle for the majority of the citizens on planet Earth. There just is. And while billionaires may not be in that same position because they don't need to, and maybe they're in the second half of their life and they're not looking at it from that viewpoint, so what? You know, I'll do 10%, 12%, 15%, 20% maybe with my company. Who cares if they increase the money supply by 3% or 6%? If I'm a public company, who cares? I'm going to get bailed out anyway. The banks are going to bail me out if I get into trouble. They have the safety net of that. Who's going to bail you out? You know? And at the end of the day, who's bailing the banks out? You are with your tax dollars. That's what's happening. So it's an unfair game. It's the playing field is not level. It is not done in a fair way, because a fair way would be done in an ethical way where it's fair for every citizen and every person on earth. And it's just not done that way. Now, do we have to sit here and go that we're victims and there's nothing we can do about it and poor me and I can never get ahead? No, you got to have an attitude of like, what is the point of view I must hold to succeed and thrive? That's the point of view. And where is the vehicle out there that will help me thrive and help me get ahead instead of sitting on a melting iceberg? That's the question that everybody needs to ask themselves. And one who doesn't do the research and doesn't figure out that Bitcoin is here to stay, and this is one of the best technological innovations ever introduced on planet Earth, will be left behind. It's really that simple. And when one does understand this technological innovation, and they do understand Bitcoin, then the next level is to understand companies that are adopting the standard and looking at companies like this and maybe considering, hey, could this be a good company that I believe in where I'm going to put my money? And at the end of the day, that's what you're left with. You're left with, you know, you go out and you work all day long and you bust your ass, right? And at the end of the day, you take home $1 or a peso or a euro. What are you going to do with it? You know, how are you going to take care of your family? What's the next generation going to look like for your kids? You know, what principles are the kids going to learn? Okay, that's why I got to have a new platform coming out. I'll tell you guys about when I open it up. It's going to be free. And it's a new platform, but it'll be like a totally new educational platform on finance on a 6th grade level. And then after we do phase 1, we're going to do phase 2, where we open it up to kids and give kids the education they need. Because kids should be learning about this in a fun way at an early age. And I think the world's excited about it. You know, I've got new people that are signing on to, you know, we hired new salespeople in our company recently, and we're having this discussion, and you could tell the excitement. When people start to hear the word Bitcoin or they hear Microstrategy, people are into it, you know, and not everybody, but there's great sentiment and great interest in this because the world wants to get ahead, and we should get ahead. You deserve to get ahead. And quite frankly, the more people get the data, the more people get interested, the more people get the knowledge, the more one has the knowledge, the more control they will have over their financial future. So getting the knowledge, getting the data, understanding Bitcoin is the most important thing I think economically and financially anybody can do right now. Understanding Bitcoin, understanding where I'm going to store my hard-earned money for my future, understanding that, I think, is a really, really important thing. And the more one understands it, the more they can have hope about a better future, the more that they can have a better future, and the more they can outpace the sinking iceberg, or the melting iceberg, I should say. And that's a very, very good thing. It's a very, very exciting thing. So, get educated on it, as you all are. Introduce it to your kids, and I mean, I talk about it with young kids all the time, and they're interested. And I'm surprised that some of the kids who are 13 or 15 or 20 don't really know much about it. So there's some that do, and there's a lot that don't. So I'm constantly sitting there and talking to them about it and educating them on, hey, go watch this, check this out, learn this, because they need a sound economy and a sound money for their future. And right now, in present day, the popularity of that sound currency has not hit a critical mass yet to where it is the thing. And I think our job is, if you believe in Bitcoin and you believe it's a sound money, quote unquote, and you believe it's a sound store of value, however you view it, it's our job and our responsibility, if we believe it's a good thing and we know it's a good thing, to share with others to help them have a better future. So that's the goal of this channel. I hope it serves you, and hope you have a great rest of your week. And not financial advice, not tax advice, not legal advice. I just love, love, love Bitcoin. I love, love, love MicroStrategy. And I too, if the stock goes down, and I too, if I lost money one day in this thing, I too would have feelings of like, wow, that was a huge risk. So always take a look at what you're doing. Always take a look at your risk profile of what you feel is right for you. And always just make decisions based on your point of view, based on the data that you believe is true to you, and not based on what anybody else thinks, including what I think or anybody else out there says. We all need to make our own opinions and our own decisions based on our own situations, period. Okay? Hope it serves you. See you on the flip side. Stay well, friends.